Hello, is anybody there?
Yes, we are here. If you can just mute yourself for now and then listen in, but you are, yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great, thank you.
Cheers. Hello everybody, and welcome to this latest online meeting of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Forestry and Tree Planting. My name's David Lee. I'm an event host and writer, and I work across a number of sectors including forestry. My job is simply to guide us through proceedings today as we discuss the Conifer report on biodiversity, forestry and wood. Can I ask everybody who's not a direct participant if you can turn your video off, please? It just is quite distracting for the presenters. Slide your cursor to the bottom of your screen, a white bar will appear, and if you click on the right hand button that's got a picture of a camera on it, that would be very helpful. And also mute your microphones, please, to avoid any background noise. We've got a real mixture of organisation perspectives on the call today, and we look forward to people contributing questions and comments via the chat box. If you're not familiar with Google Meet, if you take your cursor to the top right of your screen, there is a little speech bubble. Click on that and add your comment or question, and I'll bring in as many of you as possible. If for any reason you've got a highly complex question, just say, can I come in, please? And again, I will try and bring you in to make your contribution. Tweet, if you're so minded, using the hashtag Con4Webinar. Ben Lake, our chair, is temporarily delayed in the House at the moment, but will be with us soon. So what we're going to go to first, Lord Goldsmith, the Minister responsible for forestry, as you all know, spoke very passionately at our last meeting about the England tree strategy. He couldn't make it today, but he offered to record a short message. So we're just going to share that on screen now and hear a short message, hopefully, from Lord Goldsmith. Hopefully here it comes. Over to you.
Thank you to the APPG on Forestry and Tree Planting for your invitation today, and apologies for not being there in person. But I'd like to give a short update on the work we're doing on forestry, biodiversity and the England tree strategy. Conifer's Biodiversity, Forestry and Wood report published in July is a hugely welcome contribution to the discussion in this area. And what's clear is that we need to work to improve the quality and diversity of our woodlands to support both the productive timber market and help tackle the twin crises of biodiversity loss and climate change. We should also remember that planting trees has an important role to play in managing floods and drought. And finally, as we build up our economy, a renewed effort to plant and manage our forests and trees is clearly going to be an important part of a green recovery, because forestry provides both multiple environmental and social benefits and sustainable products for construction and clean energy. So the government is committed to expanding and managing our woodlands in a way that delivers the widest possible benefits. And Conifer's report proposes some critical points to support this endeavour. As you know, we're working now to develop the England Tree Strategy, the consultation for which closed on the 11th of September. We received a huge number of responses, which reflects the immense value and importance that the general public and key stakeholders and the forestry sector place on trees and woodland. And I want to thank all of you who submitted a response. It is a critical moment to have your voice heard and to help shape the future of trees and woodland in England. And of course, I support Conifer's key message that we need to plant more trees, manage more of our existing woodlands, and use more homegrown wood. With over 1,800 individual responses and more than 16,000 further responses from the impressive letter writing campaigns undertaken by a number of NGOs, we're going to need a bit of time to reflect and review the feedback that we've received. But the outcomes of the consultation will be published later this year, and we will publish the tree strategy in the coming months. So for now, I want to thank Conifer and its members again and assure you that I look forward, as do my team, to continuing to work with you in the meantime. I hope your event is a success today.
Thank you very much to the Minister for recording that message for us. I'm pretty sure that Ben Lake is still, oh no, perfect timing by Ben Lake. Ben, you've just arrived at the perfect moment. We've already played the short video from Lord Goldsmith. So just as he composes himself, I'll hand over to the chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Forestry and Tree Planting, Ben Lake, to give us a few words of welcome. Over to you, Ben, if that's okay.
Can you hear me now? I hope you can. Thank you very much for that, and apologies for, again, dashing in just in the nick of time. I'm just come from a question session in the Commons, but it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all now for the third online event that we've held as an APPG. I don't know really when we can expect to meet again physically in the estate. I think it's probably going to be online meetings for the foreseeable future, but when they're organised so well, I take no credit for that, by the way, but when they are organised so well, there's not much difference at all. However, today we're met now just to discuss a little bit about the report of the APPG. We know that the deadline is passed now for the consultation on the England tree strategy, and we're waiting now for the outcome for that. The APPG responded, as you may well know by now, and the submission was based really on three key and interlinked pillars of industry, those being planting more trees, managing more existing woodlands better, and using more homegrown wood. Of course, we all await now the conclusion of the consultation and its findings with great interest, but it's absolutely vital that that taking the strategy forward includes close engagement with the forestry and wood industry. Effectively making sure that those on the ground, or on the front line rather, are very closely involved with policymakers as they draw up plans for the future. You will have hopefully received our newsletter, which was sent out to members of the group recently, and there's some positive news really from both Scotland and Wales. Scotland, which is already planting around 11,000 hectares of new woodland every year, more than 80% of all trees in the UK, has raised its 2024-2025 target from 15,000 hectares to 18,000. I understand there's a really strong pipeline of planting coming through in Scotland. And then in my own backyard in Wales, after a disappointing year of planting in 2019-20, the Welsh Government has now injected significant funding into the Glaster planting scheme. which should support quite a bit of an increase in planting this year and next. Now, if England and Northern Ireland follow suit, then we can deliver multiple benefits for our economy, society and environment across the 4 nations of the UK. Now that environmental aspect is the focus of our meeting today, as we discuss Conifer's new report, Biodiversity, Forestry and Wood, an analysis of the biodiversity benefits of modern forestry and wood production. Now, we've heard much at meetings of this group about the enormous role that forestry and wood can play in reducing CO2 emissions and tackling the climate emergency. We've also heard that the climate emergency and the nature crisis go hand in hand. Most recently from David Attenborough in the Extinction Programme, which you haven't watched it yet. I highly recommend that you do. I think it can be caught on iPlayer. So what can modern wood producing forests contribute to addressing nature as well as the climate emergency? Well, soon we're going to be hearing from Conifer CEO Stuart Goodall and report author Eleanor Harris on why Conifer produced the report and a little bit more about its findings. Now there'll be an opportunity for questions after the presentation, but first I believe we still have Lord Goldsmith, the Minister responsible for forestry, who spoke very passionately at our last meeting.
We've had him before. Sorry, Lord Goldsmith's been on. We played Lord Goldsmith then. He beat you to it in the end.
There we are. Well, in that case, then, rather than going over to the video clip, but thanks to Lord Goldsmith for preparing that clip. He wasn't able to be with us, but it's really, really appreciated that he was able to give the clip. Given that, we'll hand over now to Stuart. I think next, Stuart Goodall, the CEO of Conifer.
That's right, Ben. Thanks very much for that. Just to set the scene for Eleanor's presentation on the key elements of the report, I just wanted to say that one of my big frustrations as Chief Executive at Conifer is outdated perceptions of productive forestry. I mean, in the 20th century, we saw a government-driven dash for fibre, which did significantly increase our forest area. Though some forests were planted without a proper assessment of site suitability, visual impact, or benefits for wildlife. However, the planted forests of last century did support more wildlife than is commonly understood, and many have evolved to be exemplars of multi-purpose forestry. Unfortunately, the worst examples appear to have stuck in the minds of the sector's detractors, who appear to view them as representative of forestry practice, both then and now. Modern forestry, from the 1990s onwards, has seen trees planted and woodlands managed to a very high environmental standard, the UK forestry standard, with a mix of species, open spaces and areas managed for biodiversity. They are economic, but also social and environmental. We know well what trees and timber can deliver in the hard fight against damaging climate change, but I'm mindful the sector can't be seen as another one-trick pony focusing solely on a dash for carbon. Thankfully, that's not what we're about. We deliver multi-purpose forestry. But if we're to change the minds of our detractors, that claim needs to be backed up by evidence. From my own experience, I knew that well-managed modern forests could deliver benefits for both the climate and biodiversity. Unfortunately, much of my evidence was anecdotal, whether that was the red squirrel Maginot Line in Northumberland, sea eagles on Mull, or woodlark and nightjar in Thetford Forest in Norfolk and Suffolk. I had come across robust evidence from Forest Research and others, but this had been left to gather virtual dust in unvisited websites, and crucially, still only encapsulated analyses of biodiversity from last century, before we made big strides in diversifying our forests and delivering even more biodiversity benefit. It was a similar story with native woodland. I knew from talking to Conifer members that active management can be key to realizing biodiversity potential, but even until relatively recently, there were many who felt that such management was largely irrelevant, and producing wood was unnecessary in supporting the cost of that management. Spurred on by the alarm bells of the nature crisis, I decided we had to look at the available evidence, speak to practitioners, and produce a report. So that's what we did, and I'm now pleased to hand over to Eleanor Harris, Conifer's policy researcher, to explain what we found. Over to you, Eleanor.
Thank you, Stuart, and hello everybody. Some woods are managed for biodiversity, some woods are managed for wood production, but this report was asking the question, why not both? So to find out, I read well over 100 papers. I interviewed a score of Conifer members, and I had feedback from another score of expert reviewers and critics. And I know many of you are here today, and every one of you helped shape the report. So thank you to all of you. The report's got 3 parts: the biodiversity in forest planted for wood production, the potential for managing native woodlands for wood and biodiversity simultaneously, and the effect of producing wood in the UK on biodiverse forests around the world. So I'll look at each of these one by one. Part 1 looked at the biodiversity value of our conifer forests planted for softwood production. I was surprised at the amount of evidence that I found. Dozens of studies measuring thousands of plots in all kinds of forests across the UK. And I was quite astonished at how much life there was in these forests and how relatively little tree species matters to the forest ecosystem compared with other factors such as size, structure, and management. Yes, there are species and ecosystems for which our native trees are vital, like the 555 species that depend on oak trees. But there's a far larger number of birds, mammals, invertebrates, plants, mosses, lichen, and fungi, which will happily inhabit any kind of woods, and whose range has expanded thanks to our 20th century timber forests. As well as finding these rich forest ecosystems developing in our old-fashioned plantations, these studies provided the evidence base for forestry regulations, diversification of the crop with open space and native trees, retention of deadwood and old growth, harvesting of timber in a mosaic creating diverse habitat, the careful siting of forests, and the protection of microhabitats such as wetlands. We now take all these for granted in forestry practice. Our forests have already been delivering for biodiversity, and going forward, they're modelled on best practice to deliver more. Part 2 of the report looks at native woodland, of which England alone has almost 1 million hectares. It produces little wood for the low carbon economy, although its theoretical potential could increase sustainable UK production by up to 2/3. But it's not sustaining biodiversity as it should either. Oak may support 555 special species, but you don't get that by planting oak trees. The oak woodland habitat must be nurtured into good condition. So we explored the potential for native woodlands to be better managed for both biodiversity and timber simultaneously. Bats thrive when native woodland is thinned. Coppice management is essential for dormice. Our Conifer members provided practical examples of integrated management in action, such as in Exmoor and Eltersley, where bluebells, flycatchers, and turtle doves came back thanks to conservation timber production. And there were 3 ways timber could benefit native woodland. One was sensitively extracting wood, creating sunny glades, space to grow, regeneration, and rich old stumps. 2 is protection. Grey squirrel is the single biggest destroyer of native woodland in England, but a timber grower will tackle them, as our Penrith case study shows. The timber grower will fence out deer and sheep and monitor for invasives and disease. They'll invest. And 3 is income. Conservation costs money. Sales of timber or firewood supplement conservation funding, for example, through elms, and multiply what can be done. The British Woodlands Survey, just out, finds that the top management aim of most private woodland owners is nature, but it's the forests which are also producing wood which have the most resilient management regimes. Part 3 of the report puts this into global context. I'm sure you know that the UK imports 80% of the wood it uses and is the 2nd biggest importer of wood in the world. And I'm sure you already know that global wood use will triple by 2060. But did you know that wood from planted forests reduces harvesting of natural forests around the world by 25%? And did you know that the global rate of forest planting for wood has fallen off this century? These are both encouraging and worrying figures. We can produce renewable materials without exploiting natural forests, but we're not. the UK, which is one of the least forested countries in Europe, could take a global lead. Writing this report convinced me that in the UK, wood production and woodland biodiversity really is a choice, but it's not of one or the other. It's a choice between having both or having neither. But please don't take my word for it. Dig into the report and follow up the references, engage in the debate, which has already begun, get in touch and chat to me afterwards, and commission research to fill the gaps, because this choice is one that we need to get right.
Thanks very much indeed, Eleanor, and thank you to Stuart. We're going to go to a couple of parliamentarians first for questions, as this is the APPG. And if you do want to post a question, please remember, just click it in the chat box. Just say you'd like to come in, and I'll try and bring you in later on in the discussion. Is Lord Colgrane on the call? Because Lord Colgrane said he would like to ask a question. Lord Colgrane, are you there? I'm taking that as a no, so I will ask Lord Colgrane's question on his behalf. Lord Colgrane had said, after I asked Lord Goldsmith about tree planting in the House of Lords earlier this month, one question raised afterwards was about biosecurity in the UK. Would planting more forests here to produce wood reduce pressure on global forests and also reduce the risk of importing pests and diseases? Stuart, do you want to take that one?
I will do. Thanks, David. I mean, this is a really important issue. We know global consumption of wood is increasing, partly because it's a versatile material, but also because it locks up carbon and displaces materials like steel and concrete that have high embodied energy. My own view is we should take responsibility wherever we can. And we've got the opportunity to produce more wood sustainably in the UK, whether that's from existing undermanaged woodland or by planting new woodland. If we do that, it's going to reduce pressure on fragile forests overseas. And while I have to accept we'll never be self-sufficient in wood, if we can use more hardwood and softwood grown in the UK, we'll clearly reduce the points of entry for damaging tree pests and diseases.
Okay, and Ben, I think, do you want to come in with a question, Ben?
Sorry, still getting the unmute button right. Thank you, Neil. No, Stuart, you said earlier that perceptions are often based on the forestry plantations of the last century, and they often come under quite a bit of criticism as being quite dark places, you know, that they're quite densely planted and what have you, with no light and little prospect for life. I'm just interested, what did the report find about these old style plantations, and any kind of comments on how the new way of planting compares?
Thanks for that, Ben. It's something that I must admit was really close to my heart. And what I'm going to do here is rather than try and give you a synopsis, I'm going to ask Eleanor if she could come in and give you the perspective from the person who actually authored the report. Eleanor, can I pass that one to you, please?
Yes, thank you. There's two things to think about here. One is that any type of tree, if you plant them for growing timber, you plant a new site and they grow, there'll be a point where all the trees are at the same age, they've closed the canopy and they're shading out the ground cover. And actually you really need that as part of the process of switching from a grassland or whatever the former land use was to a woodland. You need to shade out that old ecology so that as the woodland starts to mature, you start to get the ferns and the mosses and the woodland flora under the new woodland canopy. The other thing is that you have to think of woodlands in lots of dimensions. You've got the spatial dimension upwards, so it might be quite dark and quite bare at the forest floor, deep in the forest, but above you, you'll hear the birds singing, and there'll be lichens growing on the trees in the sunshine above you, and the birds will be feeding on the insects. You've also, a stand of trees will only be a few 100 meters wide. So at the edge, there'll be lighter bits with a lot richer biodiversity, and that's where a lot of the habitat is at the edges. So over the area of a forest, and then over time as well, when the area is harvested, suddenly the ecology changes, and you get all this dead wood and light flooding in and different types of creatures, and then scrubland as the trees grow up. So over the to focus on that dark ground level in one stand of trees is a very small component of the overall forest habitat, which is a very diverse and dynamic thing, and in 3 dimensions.
Okay, thanks, Eleanor. I'm going to bring Baroness Young of Ulskuden in a minute. There's a particular point raised in the chat about that, following on from Ben's question. Given that single age plantations don't seem to be going anywhere, can the stage between canopy closure and first thinning be avoided? These images of lightless forest floors are a constant source of negative publicity for the forestry industry. Stuart, do you want to just that's from Raymond Foley. Do you just want to just add a few words to what Ellen has said on that topic, with particular reference to Raymond's point there?
Well, I was going to say, I think Eleanor is probably placed to respond to that and sort of batting things off here. I think part of this is about, once we have mature forests and, there's an establishment phase, at some point we have to go through that establishment phase to get to the benefits of a mature multi-age rotational forest. But Eleanor, do you want to give something a little bit more in depth than my generalist response there?
I can try. I think, I don't know if the stage can be avoided. If you're growing timber, you want to plant trees close together so the trees will grow straight. That's a sort of silvicultural requirement. And as I said, it is part of the ecological development of the forest underneath. So I read an interesting paper that was about whether lengthening the rotation of a forest was good for biodiversity. And this was a sort of, you think this might be true, that if you leave the trees for all this quick growth and harvesting might be damaging the ecology, but actually it found that dynamism of the habitat, getting through the stages quickly, having quite a lot of area that's at that very early scrub sort of stage, and getting past the thicket stage fast, by having faster growing trees, that actually increased biodiversity because it shortens that stage. So actually faster growing trees are something useful here. If you're growing an oak plantation, then you're going to have that stage is going to go on for 80 years or something. Whereas
I think this is a comment rather than a question from Fenning Wellstead. How about an image of barren floors beneath a crop of wheat? We'll just let that one sit there. I'll come over to you, Baroness Young, for your question. Baroness Young, who's also chair of the Woodland Trust. Over to you.
Thanks, David. I thought the report was very interesting and really kind of highlighted to me 2 things. One is that there's a total spectrum of woodland that we need to have particular management solutions for all through each of the stages on the spectrum, because the reality is that though well-managed woodland of all sorts will deliver for biodiversity in its unique way, that for some of the specialist species that are most threatened, you really need very particular conditions, and that we've not got to lose sight of that in the dash to plant trees. So really this is one for Stuart. I mean, with that in mind, Stuart, what would you want to see by way of policy shift during this period when we're all going to be focused on planting, perhaps to the exclusion of management, to get that spectrum of management more firmly embedded, and also to get a respect for both ends of the spectrum from each of the people that you were pointing the finger at as being hostile to a picture that no longer exists?
Yeah, I mean, thanks for that, Barbara. I think, the key point, which you're touching on there is that there's more to this than just planting trees. And, the management side of it and bringing more woodland to management is key. And I think that was the thing I found really interesting from Eleanor's report is that we were trying to capture all parts of this story. And what I would like to see, with, for example, England Forestry Strategy, is we move on from what we've seen in the past, where we've had a strategy which often says everything to everyone, but then the delivery mechanisms tend to be very focused on restricted outcomes. Whereas what I would hope we'd see in future is government looking to develop both policy and delivery mechanisms that sit with what a woodland owner or an owner of land, a farmer, wants to do with that land. And we know that's a diverse set of interests. There are people out there who would be very interested in creating a wildlife habitat on the edge of a field, for example. And there'll be other people who are concerned about how they can keep on working the land if you're in marginal sheep farming. And if we create a more sophisticated delivery mechanism which provides for all ends of the spectrum to be able to engage in forestry, if we look at, when we're managing woodland, how we make that sustainable, which is the question we had there about, or the issue we looked at there about producing wood, which helps to pay for that. It's not the only means of paying for it, but in the absence of widespread payments for other non-market products, then that obviously has to play a key thing in the short term. And then we've got other challenges out there which we're already aware of, especially in native woodlands like squirrels and deer browsing. So there's a lot to go at there, but the key thing I would try to say is, can we look at this on the basis of the evidence? Can we, work together to say, let's achieve these outcomes, when I think we often do get a little bit insular within the forestry sector and those people who work with us on what is the best outcome for biodiversity, the best outcome for this, when at the end of the day, we're looking for a range of outcomes and all these different types of forestry have a role to play. So that's quite a wide-ranging answer, but I was trying to capture what you picked up. Is there anything you want to come back on?
No, I think that for me is it. I mean, I think we've got to get out of the trenches and start recognising the range of forestry management that needs to happen, and make sure that when we're talking about money that's available for tree planting in the near future, that it doesn't pick winners, because they're all winners.
Okay, thanks very much, Barbara. I'm just going to take a couple of comments from the chat, and then we're going to go on to some of the case studies from the report. People who are on the call. Chris Corrigan is making a point similar to Barbara. Surely overall the evidence would show priority species are disproportionately linked to native woodlands and species. UK flora and fauna has evolved to adapt to these. Non-native woodland species can be good for some species, but these are disproportionately common generalists. So won't native woodland support a much greater proportion of threatened and priority species? Lots of use of species in that sentence. I think Barbara picked up on that question, and Stuart kind of covered off the answer there. Jean Nairn, Scottish Woodlands. Eleanor, very quickly.
I think that's true up to a point. Sometimes specialist means woodland specialist as opposed to non-woodland specialist, and all types of woodland are good for those. Things like red squirrel and dormice will live in exotic conifer forests. But yes, that's exactly why we need a lot more policy focus on this native woodland management, on bringing the native woodlands we've got into good condition, and using production as a tool to help that is what we're talking about in this report. But absolutely agree.
Okay, thank you. Quick comment from Jean Nairn, Scottish Woodlands. A large woodland will have areas or compartments at different stages of rotation, so the whole large woodland will not be a dark forest floor. Areas of light, size of trees and biodiversity will vary. And I know there are questions about profit and loss, but we're not really focusing on that today. That's not really the subject of today's discussion, unfortunately. I'm going to bring in some of the case studies very briefly in the report. There are a lot of case studies. Please have a look at the report. Please read them. Eleanor, maybe you can put the link to the report in the chat box in case there is anybody who hasn't read it while we carry on. But can I bring in John Little, who's Till Hill Area Manager for West Highland District North? There was a first case study in the report, and John concludes by saying, my observation as a working forest manager over many years is that in terms of species diversity and biomass, forestry delivers a significant improvement for biodiversity on previous land use. John, can you just tell us a little bit about your experience and the kind of biodiversity improvements you've seen on the west coast of Scotland? John Little, are you going to come in, John? Have we lost you, John? We've lost John. We'll also move the point that was made there about management. It's not all about planting, as a couple of people have said, but managing existing woodland. Cheryl Lundberg of Lockhart Garrett also provided a case study for the report relating to the Eltersley estate in Cambridgeshire and the presence of turtle doves. Cheryl, do you want to come in and just give us your thoughts on what careful management can do to encourage biodiversity in modern forests with all species types?
Yeah, certainly, David. Little bit of background to the site. It's a lowland farming estate, about 85 hectares of woodland. So there's lots of agriculture, arable land, 3 primary blocks. There's lots of smaller blocks of woodland. So the key point is that every single bit of woodland on that estate is managed on a commercial basis. It was just through a bit of consultation with local experts, with Red List Revival Group, that we understood that turtle doves have been known in the area. So really simple steps to manage some of the scrub in one of the smaller blocks has brought benefit to a threatened species. But I think it's also important to say that that targeted work has benefits for lots of other open habitat species as well. Quite straightforward work, and I think more generally, we've got mixed species on that estate, but yes, lots of native species as well, and native broadleaves. But more generally, the very simple act of managing those woodlands and even just thinning, it generates the return, it's improving the future return of those woodlands. And those careful yet simple steps, such as opening up your rides, creating a rugged woodland edge, you don't need to make many tweaks to your management to benefit a huge array of flora and fauna. And I think my closing comment on that would be that we don't necessarily need to classify woodlands as conservation or commercial, and that's regardless of threatened species or rare species. They're definitely not mutually exclusive, but I think one and the same, really.
Okay, thanks very much, Cheryl. That's very, very helpful. Just a comment on the chat from Charles Bridgman: encourage existing woodland owners. There's been nothing since the scrapping of Schedule D to encourage active management of mixed and sensitive woodlands. So strong support there to give support to existing woodlands to manage their woodlands better. I'd also just like to bring in a perspective from the public forest agencies. And we've got Luke Hemmings on the call, who's a woodland officer for Forestry Commission in North East England. Luke, what are your reflections on this report as someone on the ground in an area well covered by the report? There's a case study on Kielder Forest and also a case study on Doddington, which is the largest modern forest planted in England. Luke, some thoughts from you?
Yeah, thanks for inviting me, David. Yeah, as you say, I'm kind of on the front lines in terms of delivering a lot of the new planting schemes and management of existing woodlands within Northumberland and the Northeast. And I think the first thing to say that we all kind of need to remember is that we do have very good environmental standards in place in the UK. Kind of globally, we've got the UK Forestry Standard, which is kind of supported by many partners within different sectors of the kind of forest industry and outside. So that's a really good framework, and our job as regulators is to sort of make sure that the spirit and the letter of that is being adhered to as much as possible in some of these new schemes, and that we're walking that fine line between the various different interests that are at play. And I would hope that we would kind of continue to be, find funding to ensure that that is happening, and that we've got enough people kind of on the ground who are able to do the work and provide advice and kind of do the facilitation work between the different parties who sometimes seem to be at different ends. There's obviously been a big shift over the last 30 years in terms of the kind of management that we've been seeing, but there is obviously still work that we can do, and greater interest in continuous cover forestry and looking at different species, mixing up our diversity a bit in some of our productive woodlands is, I think those are valid concerns and something that UKFS tries to address, but maybe we can continue to build on that, and it's a kind of long-term process. I think Stuart really summed up the perceptions issue amazingly at the beginning, this kind of black and white view that people do have about softwood forests or alien forests are kind of inherently bad, whereas native woodlands are good. And I think we've heard through the report and today that that's not always the case. And here in Northumberland, the red squirrels example is a really good one, but productive woodlands supporting all sorts of other species here, and as well as people's livelihoods and providing low carbon building materials towards a greener economy. So it's kind of a win-win if we can get the management aspect of it right. As you mentioned, Doddington was a kind of a big scale scheme which got a lot of attention a few years ago, and you know, kind of showcases a lot of the UKFS ideas around landscape and protecting priority habitats and species and archaeology. So it's a really great example. But I'm really pleased to say that we've also got several other large scale mixed forest schemes in the process of being planned or planted as we speak. So the kind of the interest is there, but we're also still getting a lot of native woodland schemes as well. So this, you know, this is not just a case of the entire countryside being planted with conifers. It's still a kind of tiny drop in the ocean of where we would like to be in terms of ensuring a sustainable domestic timber supply and creating that native woodland as well and improving it.
Okay, thanks very much, Luke. Interesting comment in the chat, Dan Ridley Ellis, who always says interesting and slightly provocative things. Worth also remembering that species don't have the same concept of what is and is not native that we do, and what many people consider natural is an older kind of industrial landscape. Interesting point there, Dan. If I can come back to you, Barbara Young, and then to Stuart, just on the point Luke made just there. Do you think, Barbara, that we are starting to move away from this black and white? Do you think we are making some progress in having more sort of grown-up conversations about what forestry needs to look like in future? Are things improving?
I think some of us are having more grown-up conversations, but some of us aren't. I mean, I think the spectrum is pretty huge, and I still, you know, the England Forest Strategy is going to be a key test of whether that is a universally accepted message, to be frank. I don't know what Stuart thinks about that.
That's very, very, very diplomatic. Stuart, over to you to be equally diplomatic, please, or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would certainly agree with, you know, Barbara, your first point that there are people having, you know, grown-up conversation can sound a little bit like anybody who's not involved in it or who has a different view is, you know, maybe not grown up. But I think the key thing is that what we've tried to do is to have those conversations with other people. And, you know, we've developed a very good relationship, for example, with the Woodland Trust over the years in the different parts of the UK where there's quite a lot of differences between them. And the thing which has been really useful is by having those conversations and going out, for example, to see examples of high quality native woodland. You know, Barbara came out to see the Doddington planting in the northeast of England. It just gives us a chance to talk about it and get, you know, talk through our perspectives and what we're looking for and what we think can be provided from these things. And in that way, you could argue that you know, the private sector is running ahead of the policy thinking. And, you know, could also sought to do similar with the, you know, the RSPB. And what's been really interesting recently is finding out that we can both come at the same issue, but from a quite different perspective based on what we see as the evidence. But it's what evidence that we're working with. Whereas if we develop evidence bases together, it gives us a starting point. And from that is, you know, we're seeing progress. And it's great if we can actually focus on how do we deliver shared objectives of planting more trees, the right type of trees in the right type of places and delivering all these wonderful benefits, than having to you know, sort of argue a corner because we feel that's what we need to do. So I'm quite optimistic about what we can do. Really what we want is a strategy which facilitates that. I wouldn't want a strategy which tries to direct because I think it will fail if it tries to control and manage what we do too much.
Okay, we'll just need to wrap up. I'll just basically make the point that I think was made in the chat, that the comments will be printed out and shared with everybody. And I'd just like to say, I mean, that's a very, very short time to discuss an enormous topic. I think what Confor's tried to do here is introduce a different aspect to this conversation, to bring in a report where it's recognized there is a lack of kind of overarching analysis. And I think this is a starting point rather than an end point for a whole lot of discussions. So if I can just ask you finally, Stuart, you've covered some of this off. You know, what next? We've got this report out. What does Confor hope this report will add to the debate, and where do we go from here?
I mean, very quickly, and it's been said by a number of contributors already, that, you know, this is a contribution to the debate. We're not expecting this report is going to be seen as the final word on the subject. What we want to do is, you know, as Eleanor highlighted, is, you know, we want to stimulate people to challenge, to question, to come back in it. But also, you know, my plea is, you know, the point I was just making, can we work together, you know, in future to be looking at the evidence base so that we can share the outcomes of that, rather than what has been the history in the past, where it felt like different organizations were commissioning research to come up with the answer to the question they want to put. You know, if we're really serious about tackling climate change, if we're really serious about crisis in nature, then what we want to do is ensure we work together on the best available evidence. So that would be my plea. You know, let's get the evidence right. Let's work together on this. And if we can, then I think we can achieve a lot more, because it'll free up space for us to do things, not to be just debating things.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. The point's been made on the chat that 45 minutes is far too short. We know that 45 minutes is far too short. For some people, an hour, 2 hours, half a day, a full day is far too short. What we're just trying to do is raise awareness of this report, bring in some different perspectives, talk about the issues it raises, and completely recognize that there are a whole load more conversations to continue from this, and hopefully more collaborations and partnerships to be formed. Thanks to Ben Lake and to all of our contributors, particularly to Stuart and Eleanor and Lord Goldsmith for his message at the beginning. We hope to hear more from Lord Goldsmith in this group's discussions as the England Tree strategy takes shape, and it's likely that the next APPG meeting towards the end of November or early December will be another discussion around the England Tree strategy. Thanks to everybody for listening in. Eleanor, if you can add the link to the report again, because there have been so many comments that it's disappeared, about 40 comments up. But we will share a report on this event, a copy of the webinar and a link to the report if you haven't read it. Thanks to everybody for joining us today. And in this most turbulent of times, I am reminded of the words of Sergeant Phil Esterhouse in American police drama Hill Street Blues in the 1980s, who always ended his briefing by saying, "Let's be careful out there." Thanks again for joining, and have a great rest of the day. Cheers, everybody. Bye-bye.